George, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. And thank you, by the way, for doing this study, because you really, I mean, this came out precisely at the time that 538 was pushing this notion that, well, the problem is all these people, these law-abiding people buying guns. There was nothing. You guys really dove deep into this. What did you find for your state of Colorado with this study? What was like the biggest shocker to you?
Well, thanks for having me on, Dana. I do think that this is probably an issue that most states are dealing with right now. And we were seeing such an increase in crime that when I was asked to participate in gathering this information and making the analysis, I knew there would be some tie-in to the policy decisions we had been making in terms of trying to keep people out of jail and letting people go from prison early for very thin reasons. But I did not expect us to be leading in the categories in which we led. And to give some more perspective to this study, this was not just a Republican district attorney for the largest part of Colorado. My partner in this was a Democrat district attorney from Denver who had been in charge for 12 years. He sat down and we tore through these numbers with some really smart folks. And at the end of the day, the biggest surprise to me was how much Colorado leads in all the categories you don't want to be a leader in. And whether it's the fact that we're top 5 in recidivism, whether it's the fact that over a period of time from 2008 to 2021, we hemorrhaged 1/3 of our prison population, but the number of crimes that were committed increased by 47%, and a whole bunch of other categories. We lead the country in car theft. If you want your car stolen, come to Crimerado because it will be stolen.
Crimerado. Wow. We're talking with George Brauchler, who he was the DA for the 18th Judicial District and is behind this report with Common Sense Institute, looking at the crime wave, which everyone is trying to tell America, for everybody from ABC to 538, it's firearm ownership. But that's not what it is. You touched upon something, George, very interesting when you were talking about recidivism. And tell me a little bit about this, because we've seen this in Chicago. We've seen it in a number of St. Louis. You see it in New York. They did this whole bail reform that they ended up having to walk back. What does this play into? What causes this recidivism rate from everything you looked at in Colorado?
I think it's multifaceted, and it really is the big question, Dana. I want to start, though, by stepping back and saying, look, I'm a justice seeker, right? It's all about the truth and the facts. And I do believe, and I think our system is set up for redemption. And I do believe in rehabilitation. But we have put the cart so far in front of the criminal horse. We are cutting people loose from prison or keeping them out of jail before we provide any of the resources or incentives to correct their behavior. And so what we're seeing is, I'll give you an example out of Denver. Denver has started to an explosion of personal recognizance bonds and bonds that are $1 or $2. And what we have seen over the past, let's say, past year, of all the arrests that Denver has engaged in, something like 2/3 of them are people who have been arrested within the last 3 years. Get this, though. About 1/3 or more of them have been arrested more than 5 times in the last 3 years. And yet we just recently saw, right about the day that this report came out, the Denver district attorney went to city council in Denver and defended their decisions in trying to keep people out of jail because, and this is almost an exact quote, because being in jail pending your case is disruptive to their lives.
Wow, it's probably disruptive to the lives of the people that they target and commit crimes against. The violent crime rate in Colorado, I like how you said Crimerado. Now I can't get that out of my head. Talking to George Brauchler about this. The violent crime rate in Colorado, 2020, 35% higher than 2011. Nationally, the rate only grew by 3%. Now, nationally, the rate, because I think of lockdowns and everything else, has kind of been increasing, but it's really been a number of cities and specific types of offenders that have been driving this, from what I see. Tell me a little bit about this, because that's a significant difference, 35 to 3%. I mean, that's something.
It is. And to speak directly to this thought that, well, hey, all of this crime is somehow tied to guns. If you just step back and look at another national number, back before, I'd say 2010, Colorado used to be below the national average on motor vehicle theft. And that's one that touches upon everybody, whether you're rich, you're poor. It probably impacts poor more because they need the cars for a lot more. But we've gone from being below the national average to, over that period of time, the national average increasing by 3%. Colorado increased by 135%. Jeez. Now, that's not done in a vacuum, and that has nothing to do with guns. That is just straight up lawlessness. And when you have in place policies that tend to be more forgiving or
Yeah.
tend to be more offender friendly than victim centric and prevention centric. This is exactly what you develop in your populace.
Yeah, and I love what you said too, that you believe in, this idea. Yeah, I mean, you believe in redemption, and you believe in, the rehabilitative possibility of criminals that are going through this. But at the same time, the deterrence is so low. I mean, there's really, what is going to stop someone from committing a crime if their moral center won't allow it? Then the law, the deterrent that should be provided by the law doesn't do it. What's going to stop them?
No, nothing. For many of these folks that engage in these behaviors, this is a business decision of sorts, and they weigh the risks and the costs to the benefits that they receive. Now, in addition to the data, we have countless anecdotal stories from folks that focus on the violent crime or focus on the motor vehicle theft. And they will tell you that the people that they arrest 1, 2, 3 times will tell them straight up, I know I'm not going to jail tonight. I know that I'm able to do this again and again with near impunity and not have to worry about the consequences. That creates incentives for conduct, but more than that, it removes the disincentives that we count on to keep people from committing crimes.
This prison population, I was looking at the incarceration levels, declined in Colorado by 33% between 2008 and 21. That's that's well over 7,000 inmates, and that's when you had said earlier that crime increased by about 47%. That's over 131,000 crimes. That's a lot. And I understand, if people want to talk about prison population, fine. Let's look at that. I think we've expanded the definition of felony. There's a lot of stuff to discuss, but we are talking about like violent criminals. We're talking about people that are, carjackings and assaults and, so many other things. These are people who are using violent means to commit crimes, or violence is their crime. And why did the incarceration levels drop so much? Is it because of this, like these wrist slaps that judges are giving out, or because there are other DAs that are not wanting to go for the full, mandatory allowance of what some of these punishments might be?
You have hit on 3 big areas, all in that one question. First off, you can see this nationally, but we're feeling it in Colorado, is there is a trend now to elect people into the lead law enforcement officer position, the district attorney's office, who not only lack the background in the criminal justice arena, but who are ideologically minded to try to keep people out of jail and prison, otherwise blaming societal ills for some of these things that happen. You combine that with the fact that for the longest time now, a Colorado that I grew up in that was a little bit right, center of right, has now become pretty blue. The people whose hands are on the lever of government some years ago decided, you know what, we got too many people in prison. Let's start closing down prisons. They forced all of that population into the remaining system and then started saying, we're bursting at the seams. We have too many people in prison. Because of this explosion in crime, they're now forced to have to consider reopening some of the prisons that they closed. Those are all going hand in hand. But then when you start having your elected leaders, from governor to attorney general to the legislature, come out and use the term just in front of a series of crimes, like it's just drugs, or it's just burglary, or it's just car theft, you diminish the impact of those crimes, not just for victims, but for the people who want to victimize them. I think one of the things we've lost sight of is redemption and rehabilitation cannot be put before the public safety aspect. And that's what we're seeing. My guess is the people watching your show right now are thinking to themselves, is this going on where I live? And my answer to you is yes. Yes, it is.
Yes, it absolutely is. Talking with George Brauchler, who had served as DA in Colorado, with this awesome report from the Common Sense Institute. So, George, what is, the best way forward with this? It's tough when it feels like, you're up against a Goliath here, because there are so many DAs. There was obviously a concentrated effort, whether it's a judge, whether it's a prosecutor, to get people who are really, really soft on penalty. It almost seems like the accommodation is for the criminal over the person who has been victimized. So what is the best way to go forward with this? I like the idea of having strong deterrence as a way to dissuade people, of making them think twice about committing a crime, because they're not going to get a wrist slap and be out in 18 months.
I agree with you. The entire approach to public safety is this balancing act that we've gone through between the carrot and the stick. And while I am open to the idea that there were times that we favored the stick to the exclusion of the carrot, it's not that way anymore. We don't have a carrot and a stick. We have nothing but carrots and then maybe a weed that we tend to whack these criminals with. We need to go back to a time where there's balance here. I'm all about the idea that mental health and drug addiction drive a significant portion of our criminal conduct. I agree with that. But the answer isn't cut the people loose who are mentally ill and have drug addiction to the streets and then try to figure out how to provide them treatment or the incentive to act lawfully. Well, that's what we've done. And I think now the chickens are coming home to roost. And I'm anxious to see how all of the people who were, in the hug and offender category, how they're going to explain away these numbers, because the data is just the data.
Yeah, and this data, we are seeing it across the country. This is a fascinating study. I've written about it, and folks, you can go to commonsenseinstituteco.org and look at. You got to look at these numbers yourself. George Brauchler, thank you so much for joining me on this and breaking this down. Thank you for putting this out here too, because when you can't argue cold hard numbers, and that's exactly what you brought. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you, Dana, for keeping the focus on this topic. It's not going away, and let me know if there's anything I can ever do for you.
Yes, sir. Will do. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
See ya.